Talking about a series more than once when it comes to my YouTube channel and how I've done my content provides some interesting challenges. Part of it is because I enjoy going into the background of a lot of how media is made, as well as a synopsis of what happens in whatever I'm covering. My own personal thoughts are usually a fairly small part of any overall video. This is actually one of the major reasons Tenchi has been on my channel so often, other than it being the most popular content, is the simple fact of the matter that when I talk about it, I'm giving everyone information and details about the series while sprinkling in my own thoughts. This makes a change I've done when it comes to talking about longer form cartoons a little harder for me when it comes to the writing of the script and talking about it, mostly because I'm lacking a lot of that structure that comes from being able to tell you a show's history, considering we covered it in a previous episode. Basically, you're gonna be hearing a lot more of my own personal thoughts and opinions when it comes to returning shows. I can only hope I bring you something interesting as we talk about the second season of The Batman 2004. Hello everyone, I am your ever-friendly Pokeprof, and welcome back to Fascinating Fiction. Before anything else, I'm fully gonna come out and say it, I'm kind of ashamed of how I've handled things lately when it comes to my content. I want to provide you all with regular scripted videos, and I feel like that I have failed in that aspect while trying to balance things in my life. The fact that there's only been 5 videos over the course of half a year is a sore point for me, especially since in the original Batman video, I was talking about how I wanted to keep hitting a 2-week time frame for my content. I'll try to be a bit better this year, considering I've actually got plans set in place for what I'm wanting to do, but sickness and my day job have already provided challenges, as you saw by the fact that there was nothing in January. Just know that I'll try to be better, and let's talk about the Batman already. So one of the most immediate things I've got to mention about season 2 of the show is the fact that it feels like the creators somehow heard my complaint about season 1 almost 20 years later. The biggest gimmick of the show, the Batwave, has a much reduced role in the series. Instead of being name dropped and having some use in almost every single episode, its focus mostly relies on the remote controlling of the Batmobile and some occasional side uses. It feels like it's much more properly used overall, instead of acting like an early alert system like season 1 would be, and occasionally just controlling all of Batman's tech. We also get a bit more of Batman's intelligence in the show, with him often doing research or showing to be able to fix things, though this is actually probably shown off the best in the second episode of the season, Riddled, being the first appearance of the Riddler, of course. And speaking of appearances, I'm not really a huge fan of Edward Nygma's design here, which tries to give him a bit more of a gothic look with the way he's got the markings alongside of his cheeks. I know the general style of the show has been for the more angular and darker looks, but the Riddler is one of those characters that something like that doesn't really fit, at least with me. Riddler has always been about being the intelligent villain when it comes to Batman's rogues gallery. He's a thinker, and his look should reflect as much, which is why I've always enjoyed the BTAS original design for him in that bowler hat with the suit and tie. It gives the feel that as a villain, Nygma is above such things as physical fighting. Riddler isn't the only new character that gets shown off in the season though, as we get 4 new villains for this Batman to deal with. 2 really well-known characters in Killer Croc and Hugo Strange, and 2 lesser-known characters in Spellbinder and Ragdoll. Strange is actually a character that's a bit of a sleeper villain, because he's clearly being built up as a major thing in later seasons, never actually going against Batman in the episodes he's featured in. Spellbinder is perhaps the most interesting villain conceptually though. One of the biggest aspects of nearly any Batman show is that they tend to be, for the most part, set in a realistic setting, and this show plays that straighter than most. Nearly every villain that we see is either mostly a normal human, like Catwoman or Penguin, using technology, like Firefly, or is modified by some way of science, in the case of the Joker and Mr. Mr. Freeze. Spellbinder is the first villain that shows that there's something else going on, using mystical powers to hypnotize the characters. It's explained away as something that anyone is capable of doing with a lot of training in the mystic martial arts, but this is one of those things that I never really understood when it came to any Batman cartoon. If you're gonna have him deal with the likes of Superman and the Justice League eventually, you should probably have the idea of magic brought in sooner rather than later. I should also mention that as far as villains for Batman go, most people when they hear Spellbinder, they're gonna be thinking about the Batman Beyond version of the character almost every time. Season 2 also does something interesting with the villains in the respect that outside of Killer Croc, Spellbinder, and Riddler's first appearance, nearly every episode is a villain team-up or just has two villains popping up at the same time. The Catwoman episodes actually serve as a great example of both showing off how this tends to happen this season, as well as the general quality of the episodes as a whole. The first episode, The Cat, the Bat, and the Very Ugly, has a direct team-up with Catwoman and Penguin, and it actually plays on just how that relationship between the two are often shown in other forms of media, usually with Selina getting ahead because of her sex appeal. It's only roughly halfway throughout the episode that we get to see the fact that Oswald has been stringing her along the entire time, even getting a dig in that his Kabuki twin henchwomen are more his type. It's a pleasant surprise to know that we get to see a character that's almost always shown as this dopey and comedic villain being turned into something actually threatening, which, mentioning it now, has actually been happening with Penguin a lot lately, I've noticed. The second Catwoman episode, titled Ragdolls to Riches, on the other hand, loses a lot of that quality and brings back the problems I had with Season 1, particularly the lack of development for some of the characters. While this is the first time we actually get to see Selina out of the Catwoman costume, showing that there is a real life behind the mask, we get absolutely nothing on the secondary villain of the episode, Ragdoll. We don't know how he got his powers, we don't know why he's just a simple thief or the reason for his theme, hell, we don't even get the man's real name at all. I can understand that this series is more about the superheroics compared to other Batman cartoons, but Ragdoll really stood out for me because of just how little we know about him and how little the show seems to actually care. And speaking of choices that baffle me, there's one that they did here on two fronts that, well, takes a bit of an explanation and requires me going into spoilers for one of the major story elements from Season 1, which, if you're watching this video, I would have hoped you have already watched Season 1, but I'm putting a tiny spoiler warning here, just in case. One of the biggest story elements from the finale of Season 1 of The Batman was the fact that Ethan Bennett, the supporting character that was Bruce's childhood friend, ends up being turned into this show's version of Clayface by some chemical concoction called a Joker putty. Like with other things in the show, the how and why of the putty's creation was never answered, outside of it making Ethan into Clayface, who lashes out at the police chief as the man has a anti-freak policy and, well, Ethan's a freak now as far as he's concerned. We don't see Ethan again until he comes back into the episode Meltdown, the focus of which is to turn him completely into a villainous Clayface. But the way it's handled is off from what we see of the character and what information they give us. While you can go with the idea of the mental torture from Joker, the putty, and the harsh life of trying to go straight, eventually pushing him into the idea of being a villain, the episode itself has Joker being the tipping point for Ethan, eventually convincing him into being a criminal. And I'm sorry, that just doesn't work for me. Even if they wanted to make Clayface a bad guy and a tragic figure from this point onward, I don't think anyone would willingly take the advice of the very villain that did all of these horrible things to you in the first place. The idea of an anti-hero Clayface along the line of Marvel's Venom probably would have worked better here. Someone who wanted to be a good guy, but does so through means that Batman himself isn't willing to support. Instead, we just get Ethan turned into more or less a petty criminal, going and stealing stuff just for the fact that he wants money now. Which actually leads us to the other supporting character of the show, Ellen Yin, and that after this season, she actually just vanishes from the series, getting mentioned in an episode or two later on, but that's about it. We actually don't know the reason for her character's disappearance, but there are a couple of theories, ranging from either her voice actress not being available as much, to Warner Brothers wanting to tone down the violence and make things a bit more kid-friendly. From what I've heard about season 3 of the show, this might be the most likely case, but I haven't watched it yet, so it's simply a theory on my part. Perhaps one of the things that stood out to me the most, however, was the lack of Bruce overall as a character within this season. While I'm one of those people who are fully on board with Bruce being the mask while Batman is the true identity of the character, you still need Bruce Wayne to do his thing to give Batman a bit of downtime. The moments that we do get Bruce just being Bruce, like the Halloween episode, are so much fun in this series because they're so rare. I felt that could have been shown off a tad bit more within the series. Despite the mostly minor complaints I've got for the season, it does house 2 episodes that I absolutely love. The first is JTV, which the main reason I like it is because of one single glorious reason, and that's the fact that we get Patrick Warburton in a Batman cartoon.
Say hello to Cash Tankinson.
I just love the man's voice, and it's always a treat to hear it in something new. That's actually another thing to mention about the show, the sheer wide reach of the voice cast that they were able to hire for some of these roles. Some of the actors are just that well known, such as Ron Perlman being Killer Croc. Others, however, have some legacies I couldn't even believe. The biggest example would actually be Hugo Strange's voice actor, who was played by Frank Gorshin, the original Riddler from the Adam West days. This, however, sadly only amounts to a handful of appearances before his passing in 2005. It's actually amazing, though, just how wide the pool of voice talent this show was able to get. But it's the episode The Laughing Bat that honestly is my favorite of the bunch, as it gives us a rather interesting twist to things. In this episode, we get to see a hint of what happens when you fuse together a Joker and a Batman almost a full decade before the Batman Who Laughs would make an appearance in comic books. Basically, being fed up with Batman getting all the focus and no one enjoying his jokes, Joker decides to be the Batman. Of course, being the insane clown that he is, Joker's idea of enforcing the law comes down to punishing anyone who breaks simple rules. Things like littering or checking out 11 items at a 10-item checkout. But every Batman needs a Joker, and to make his own, Joker gives Batman a special dose of his venom, something that's making Batman laugh more and more, unable to control himself. The only real flaw in this plan the episode puts forward is that instead of becoming a Joker himself, Batman will just die when the venom fully gets into his system. Honestly, I think it would have been better for him to just turn into the Joker instead, because that's probably a worse fate than death for Batman. Not to mention that if this version of our clown is able to make a chemical that is what created Clayface, I've no doubt that he can also do the same kind of chemical whatsits to make another version of himself. I feel like that overall, Season 2 of The Batman is an improvement of the first. While having nearly every single episode of the season being a team up for our villains does feel like we get a lack of focus on them, the actual events of the stories usually makes up for that. Add in Batman showing more of his intelligence and skills in a fight, it gives us the feeling that this is a more well-rounded Dark Knight than we had before. While I am uncertain of the future, barring one or two particular aspects, I'll be looking forward to our next time that we visit this version of the Batman, as it's going to be offering us something that I can hopefully really sink my teeth into. With all that said, I hope I've done a good job to entertain you, and I'll do my best to do so again in the future. Hopefully you'll follow along with my content by subscribing and doing all the other things that gives us YouTubers life. If you wish to support me a bit more, I do have a Patreon where you can get access to bonus content. But until next time, stay frosty.